Yeah, it's a really interesting time to talk about this topic of digital health and innovation. Um, just starting with the title, what do we mean by digital health? In Ireland, it really means two distinct activities. So one is the software systems to better manage patients, to better diagnose disease, to better manage chronic illness. But also because Ireland is traditionally a mechanical medical device manufacturing site. A lot of the innovation in the space is coming in adding sensors to implants and to traditional medical devices. So there's two separate activities happening. I'm also going to talk purely about innovation in the next 30 minutes. So not basic research, and that is a separate process. And I suppose just to explain my interest in innovation, my background is as an engineer, as Becky mentioned, and I got my first large research grant around 2010. At the time, I was developing a technology for the treatment of, or for the diagnosis of breast cancer. And when you get a large grant, you think about it and you say, well, one thing I would like to happen in this 4-year period is that the technology I'm developing starts moving towards the clinic, because you want to have that patient impact. And so as a researcher, I said, I'm going to sit down and look at groups internationally. So look at similar groups who are developing similar technologies, how they made that translation into the clinic. So at the time, there was about 180 researchers working in my field worldwide, but only 3 of the 180 had ever brought their technology and tested on a single patient. So there was this huge translational gap. So as Becky mentioned, I went back to college and I said, I'm going to understand how to do clinical trials. And so I did a master's in clinical research. And when I finished that, I realized, actually, that's not the problem. So it's not that we don't know how to do clinical studies, it's that we don't know how to raise sufficient funding to bring that technology to the market. So it's not a research problem, it's not a clinical research problem, it's actually understanding market dynamics, understanding what investors want to see in order to bring that technology to the market. So I always put this slide up when I talk, because I end up talking a lot about commercial realities, and it sounds cold and it sounds very far away from clinical research, but I see the understanding of that translational path is how we get that patient impact. And we need to be realistic and we need to understand that. On a national level, and as Kieran mentioned, we are a small open economy on the edge of Europe, but medtech is a core pillar of our economy. So we're the second largest exporter of medical devices in Europe. It amounts to about 13% of our GDP. 80% of stents used worldwide are manufactured here in the west of Ireland. And importantly, as we learned during COVID, 50% of ventilators used worldwide are manufactured here. So we are a very significant manufacturing base for medical devices. So 14 of the world's largest medical device companies have operations here in Ireland. 45,000 people are employed in the sector. And this is a stat which we talk about a lot, but one thing to consider, 63% of those jobs are in the Northwest region. So around Galway, Mayo, up to Donegal. Why is that important? So the Northwest region is largely rural. It's largely economically disadvantaged. So the GDP per person in the Northwest region is about 25,000 euro compared to a national average of 65,000 euro. So having these really high value jobs in medtech in the Northwest region is really important and something that we're very conscious of. Moreover, there are 450 companies in Ireland, but again, 60% of these companies are Indigenous Irish-owned companies. And I think that just demonstrates the innovation capacity in the sector. So we talk a lot about the multinationals, but actually most of our companies are small Indigenous Irish-owned companies. In terms of supports, we have large research centres. So we have Curum, which is a Science Foundation Ireland funded centre worth 100 million of investment into medical devices. We also have Insight, which is a centre for data analytics. We have Amber, which is a centre for materials. We also have Enterprise Ireland, which provide huge support for medtech innovation in Ireland. They provide 2-year startup funding, incubation, and local office supports. So when you look at the sector, you go, this is really healthy. It's providing lots of high-value jobs. There's lots of innovation happening. It's not just the big companies, we have the small companies too. And so this has been the case since about 2005, 2006. But in 2008, just after the crash, the university was approached by a real leader in Irish medtech, a guy called Ian Quinn. Ian had built and sold the largest ever indigenous Irish medtech company called Craigana, but he was worried about medtech in Ireland. So Ian talked about how in the 1970s and the 1980s, Ireland was leading the way in textiles. It amounted to about 10% of Irish exports. There were lots of large multinational companies and hundreds of indigenous Irish textile companies. And then with a 10-year period, that entire sector disappeared. And so Ian, when he was giving this talk, talked about how in a 10-year period, we became less cost competitive. The large companies left first. Very quickly, the smaller companies left. And there was huge economic and societal costs. And Ian was really passionate about that we didn't let this happen again in medtech. And his view on it was that we needed to create a conveyor belt of innovation, to build innovation capacity in the region. So Ian's advice was that we become R&D partners with the multinationals. So we started working with the multinationals to develop their own indigenous innovation, or their own innovation capacity. We create more startups. Importantly, we scale those startups. That we train the next generation of medtech developers. We create a common language of innovation, so we train our students and fellows to understand what innovation means. And that we create this virtuous circle. So we create a virtuous circle between the universities, the healthcare service, and industry to anchor this really important sector in the west of Ireland. So one of the things that we think about a lot when we think about innovation in medtech is just the challenges. So why is it so difficult? So when we're thinking about projects, we say medtech is akin to any other startup company, but with many more ways to fail. It's highly regulated. It requires often very expensive clinical trials to get on the market. Payment is complex. It's a selling environment where the person who benefits, the person who chooses the product, and the person who pays for the product are all different people. So it's a really complex environment to innovate. In the US, about 75% of all VC-funded, investor-funded companies fail within the first 5 years. And the average cost of getting a medical device to market is about $9 million. And so what I think about that as a researcher is I need to consider these factors at the very start. And if I want to have that patient impact, I need to consider how am I going to raise that funding? How am I going to ensure that I'm not in that 75% pool? Again, looking at the complexities, I've mentioned some of them, but it's highly regulated. You have a lot of stakeholders. You have to consider IP. You have to consider reimbursement, so how insurers pay for your technology. You have to consider your clinical strategy, all a very complex innovation environment. So how do we succeed when this is so difficult, right? We have to put systems in place. So Ian's advice was that we need to get the investor's voice into the discussion at a much earlier stage. So we need to understand what's important to them. We need to understand how we can engage with them in terms of getting that technology out of the research lab and into the clinic and onto the market. So working with Ian, we created 2 innovation programs, the Bioinnovate program and the Health Innovation Hub program. And I'm going to talk about how they work and the impact of them over the next few minutes. So in 2011, we formed Bioinnovate. It's a European affiliate program of Stanford's Biodesign. And the goal here is to change how we innovate. So rather than developing technologies and then thinking how we apply them in clinical practice, we flip it. So we go out and understand Where is the need in the clinical environment? So each year we recruit 12 high quality candidates with technical, clinical and commercial backgrounds. We pick 3 clinical areas. We might pick oncology, cardiology, those type of areas. And we put the fellows into the hospital for 2 to 3 months observing problems and inefficiencies in the healthcare service. Our goal when we do clinical immersion is we want our fellows to go in to see the entire patient journey from initial presentation in primary care to chronic disease management at home. So the entire patient journey. And we're looking for diversity. So we want to see all the problems that all the stakeholders feel, all the issues that they have in that journey from initial diagnosis to chronic management. During this period, they document each team documents somewhere between 600 and 1,000 problems within the healthcare service. And what we do then is really interesting. We start saying, if we solved that problem, what would be the impact on the patient, the payer, and the physician? How transformative would it be if we solved it? Now remember, we're not thinking how we solve it. We're just thinking if we solved it, what would happen? We think about if we solved it, what would be the market size for that solution? What is the clinical burden of proof? So how much is it going to cost for us to trial that device? What is the regulatory pathway? And what is the competition for this solution? And each week they're scoring their needs. So they have a giant Excel sheet where they're giving scores to each problem that they've identified. So in November they go from 1,000 to 200 needs. In December they go from 200 to 20. In January now they have top 10, top 20 needs. All of these are potential businesses. They remain technology agnostic, so we don't consider how you solve the problem, just we're asking the question, is it worth solving and is there a market for the solution? When they get to February, then they brainstorm solutions. So they reach out to the SFI centres, the research centres, and pull that knowledge from them, saying, we have this problem, we want all of you guys to solve it for us. And they'll develop a solution like that. In the last part of the program, they create a business plan. And we validate all our assumptions. So at this stage, we have a need and we have a solution. We go back out into the field and we validate the need and all the components of the business plan with experts. So we talk to clinicians, we talk to IP and regulatory experts, we talk to clinical research organizations about the trial. We go out to investors and we say, will you invest in this? And importantly, what evidence do you need to invest in this? And we build that into our business plan. So what are we doing in this entire 9-month process? We're identifying real patient problems that are investable, and building a plan to get that private investment. So all we're doing is de-risking, but a really, really thorough de-risking. In our first year, one of the first companies coming out of the Bioinnovate program was a company called Embo. You can see Ian is second from the left there. He's one of the investors in Embo. They raised €3 million in funding and private investment, and they were later acquired by C.R. Bard for 42 million in 2015. So from the very start, we started to see this working. There was investor appetite. We were solving real problems in the clinic, and more people wanted to get involved in the program. So since then, we've created 31 spin-out companies. 18 of those are considered by Enterprise Ireland as high potential startups, so really disruptive technology companies. Recently, when I was writing a report for Enterprise Ireland, I realised that amounts to about 12%, or one in 8 Irish medtech companies have come through the programme. So this small programme with 3 staff members is producing now 1 in 8 of all medtech companies in Ireland and digital health companies in Ireland. But we were also interested, so our average is about 2.5 companies per year that we're developing through this program. It's not scalable beyond that. They need a lot of support, but we really wanted to extend the methodology. So we created this program called the Health Innovation Hub. So we now have hospitals in Cork, or offices in hospitals in Cork, in Galway and Dublin, extending this methodology. So clinicians, healthcare workers, porters, hospital admin who want to innovate within the healthcare system now have innovation supports within those hospitals. We support, through the Health Innovation Hub program, we support companies who want to evaluate technologies within the healthcare service, and we also support clinicians or healthcare workers who want to innovate and start companies. So what we're seeing now is these programs are delivering really impactful problems, really problems that are really important to patients, problems of cost, problems related, physician problems. And we're building commercial teams around them, and through both programs and through support by Enterprise Ireland, we're now producing high potential startups. This, I think, is kind of interesting. So we're running the program now for 12 years, and you're in the hospital listening to problems and listening to issues. And what you see is kind of like a pattern, because I think it reflects society in general. You see that there are clinical areas and clinical problems that are well served. So if you go into cardiology or you go into peripheral vascular disease or interventional radiology, you see there's a lot of solutions there. There's a lot of problems. There are remaining problems, but there's very few low-hanging fruit. And the big medtech companies know about those problems and are probably developing solutions. But then when you go into other clinical areas, you see there are areas that are just vastly underserved. So you see problems in women's health that wouldn't exist in cardiology. You see problems in pediatrics that haven't been solved, really simple problems. Gerontology, mental health are vastly underserved. And again, coming back to that idea of a virtuous circle. So when I think about these clinical areas, I think this is great, right? This is great for us as a program because, one, these areas that are underserved are where the commercial opportunity is. They are the problems that aren't being solved. They are the areas where big medtech isn't. So it's good commercially, but also it's good ethically and morally that we're going into these areas that are underserved and helping provide solutions. So I think that's something that we're very excited by. One of our clinical areas for next year is rehabilitation. And a lot of that is home care, a lot of that is chronic care, totally underserved by big medtech, huge opportunity for connected health and digital health solutions. Something I haven't talked about a lot is patient prioritized needs. So when I started working with the program, I would go out and talk to doctors, and I would assume that the doctor was a really good representation of the patient. So if the doctor tells me this is the patient's problem, that's true. And then you talk to a patient, you realize their view of the clinical problem is so different. And you think, well, that's just in this case, it's probably not a universal fact. It's an absolute universal fact. So you start talking to patients, you realize that they're experiencing problems that the clinician is not aware of. Their priorities are different, their needs are different, and they're probably paying for solutions that the clinician is not aware of. So again, the embedding patient and public involvement into the program, again, is an example of a virtuous circle. It's good for us commercially, but it's also good for patients. So that's something that's really growing within the program. Again, looking at, and again, it's quite obvious when you think about it, but when you're running the program, you see patterns emerge. So if you think about the life cycle of disease management or disease treatment, you see that when the patient presents to a hospital, all the way to when they're treated and discharged, that's actually quite well understood. It's well documented. You know the problems and the inefficiencies. So one of the things we do when we want to develop digital health or connected health solutions is to ask, what happened for the patient to arrive here in the first place? And there's nobody out there, there's no solutions out there, because the healthcare switches on when they present with their disease. And so there's huge scope for innovation before the patient presents. Probably even more underserved is after they're treated. So if you're a surgeon, your view of the patient ends after, let's say they've been declared cancer-free, they're fine, they're in the community. But you see lots of needs for people who are supposedly treated, but now they're dealing with chronic pain from their surgery, or they're dealing with breathlessness if they've had, lung cancer treatment, and those problems aren't solved. They're not even articulated. And so for people interested in innovation, I would say, get out of the hospital, go to those community clinics, go to those patients groups, and there you will see really unmet and underserved needs. I'm going to just finish my talk by just showing one example of one of our alumni companies, and I think it captures a lot of what we're doing. It's a patient prioritized need. It has a digital health element to it. And it shows, I think, the opportunity for that patient engagement element. So we did, 1 year in Bioinnovate, we did a session on oncology. So one of our clinical teams was oncology. And we went into the clinicians and we talked to patients, and the patients were talking about hair loss as a real concern. And we were asking them why is it such a concern, and a lot of the people who were undergoing chemotherapy were saying that it was a visual sign to their children that they were sick. And so you have these parents who are undergoing chemotherapy really worried about the psychological effect of hair loss was going to have on their family. We asked the oncologists, is this important? They said, no, chemotherapy or hair loss is just a sign that the chemotherapy is working. We don't worry about it. Then you talk to the patients and realize actually all the patients, like 87% of patients, are going off buying wigs, buying technology to try and stop hair loss. And so we formed from the program a company called Luminate Medical. And so Luminate Medical is trying to meet that patient need of managing the side effects of chemotherapy. So they are developing technology for preventing hair loss. They're developing technologies to prevent neuropathy. Again, these are symptoms that happen after the patient has been successfully treated. So they go home, now they have less dexterity in their fingers. They deal with chronic pain in their hands from neuropathy. Many of the patients who undergo chemotherapy have fertility issues. Again, this is not necessarily a priority for your oncologist or for your surgeon, but it's a real priority for the patient. And so Luminate is developing technologies in all of this space and is also putting information back in the hands of the patient through a digital hub. So the patients can manage their symptoms, manage their treatments through this digital system. And this is how we see a lot of the connected health system coming into the program. But again, just coming back to, this is their technology for hair loss prevention. But just to conclude, because I think we're tight on time, this is why I find it really interesting, right? We are now so the hair loss device that I mentioned is being trialed on its first patient this week. So that from 2020 when we started to first patient study is happening this week. So those patients will have much reduced hair loss during chemotherapy because of this activity. And so when we're supporting these companies, we talk about investors, we talk about the commercial case, we talk about the market, but in reality, it's enabling patient impact. And so I think that's really interesting. I think it's really encouraging for us because we can see that this activity, which is so commercially focused, is having a real and tangible impact on patient care. I'll stop there now and take any questions. Thank you.